And so one of the things that Dr. Edmondson found in one of her studies was so cool was that high psychological safety environments actually report more errors because reporting an error is not a sign that you're bad. It's a sign that you're trying to make the process better. And so that's it's counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, well, you have a psychologically safe environment, there should be no errors, but it's actually low errors turn up in places where people don't feel safe to report them.
Many leaders think that when teams make fewer mistakes, it means that they are better. But what if actually it means that when teams make fewer mistakes, it means that actually they are afraid to speak up or they are afraid to make a mistake? Welcome to From a Woman to a Leader. My name is Limor Bergman, a former director of engineering, and I turn into executive coach for women in tech. And if you have ever felt stuck, overlooked, or like you're doing everything right but still not getting the recognition you deserve, this podcast is for you. Each episode brings real stories and practical strategies from women who have built bold, impactful careers on their own terms. If you want to grow your confidence, influence, and leadership without pretending to be someone you're not, hit subscribe and join me on Substack so you never miss an episode. Your next level starts here. Today's conversation is about psychological safety, and I think it's one of the most overlooked leadership skill in tech and beyond. I'm joined by Francie Jane, and she is the founder and CEO of Terawatt, and she works with organizations, especially in healthcare, to reduce employee turnover through expert-led group coaching. When people don't feel safe, they don't challenge decisions, they don't flag risks, and they eventually leave. So if you are a leader or a manager or someone who feels anxious every time you speak up at work, this episode is for you. So are you ready? Let's dive right in. Hi, Francie. How are you?
I'm great, lady. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning to you. For me, afternoon. Yeah. Wonderful to see you. And I'm very excited about our talk because I think this is a very, very important topic. So in our pre-call, we talked about psychological safety and the relation with employee turnover. So first, before we even dive into that, what is psychological safety in your mind?
Yeah. So it was basically popularized by a professor named Dr. Amy Edmondson. She teaches at Harvard Business School. And her finding was that psychological safety is actually interesting because it's a group dynamic. It's actually not even an individual dynamic. So it's the group feeling that individuals have within a group, right? So it's like how I feel as an individual within a group. And the idea is that you feel safe to bring up errors, to bring up problems, to perhaps even be like devil's advocate. The idea is that it's almost the opposite of groupthink. And so like, for instance, I think the best way to really understand it is to like talk about a scenario. So let's say, I do a lot of work with hospitals. So let's say there's a nurse and they realize that the patient was supposed to get X medicine, but it got Y medicine. That's a big error. But if the doctor told you to give Y medicine, even though it's supposed to get X medicine, if you're in a low psychological safety environment, you may just let it be, because it's not your error. And if you're in low psychological safety, you might get blamed actually for noticing the error and mentioning and saying, this is an error. And someone's saying, well, you made an error, you made a mistake. And then it becomes a whole like blame game. Yeah. Whereas in a high psychological safety environment, the nurse would immediately speak up and say, oh my goodness, we gave the patient the wrong medicine. And the doctor would say, oh, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Let's come up with a process so this doesn't happen again. And that's like the difference of what we're talking about. And so the other thing that's really just important about this is groupthink, right? So when you have high psychological safety, it means that people just are respected for their opinions, and like different ideas or things that are different from maybe the hierarchy or the boss's opinions are valued, because the idea is the more that people see how things can go wrong, the better you can design a process.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with everything you said. So, I would say that kind of the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So it means that the culture of the team or the group of people is a culture that is a kind of non-toxic, blameless culture, right? That encourages thoughts and opinions versus a culture of pointing fingers and being very kind of impatient toward any kind of error or mistake and very hierarchical, meaning if the
Yeah.
boss said something or thinks something, doesn't matter what other people think, their opinion
Exactly.
is the dominant one.
Exactly. And it's, yeah, 100%. And I think what's really cool about that is that if I also think about it like if you're the boss, right? It's always nicer when you say to your employees, I say jump and they say how high, right? It's a lot nicer when people go along with what you like. The problem is that that's like an ego driven perspective as opposed to an output, like what's the word, impact or what's actually happening, right? I mean the result. And in the end, we all really want good results. And I think that this is what it helps us open our eyes to realize like the better results happen, the more we can take the ego out and just try to like solve for like the best possible outcome. And the other thing I thought of while you were speaking is what's also cool about this is it's not like we're saying errors don't happen or everything's perfect or it's just this like la culture. It's really a culture that's driven on accountability and measurement. And because it's the culture is like a safe one to bring up problems, the problems get solved.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that Dr. Edmondson found in one of her studies was so cool was that high psychological safety environments actually report more errors because reporting an error is not a sign that you're bad. It's a sign that you're trying to make the process better. And so that's it's counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, well, you have a psychologically safe environment, there should be no errors, but it's actually low errors turn up in places where people don't feel safe to report them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess the message to our listeners, first identify if you are in an environment that feels psychologically safe. Like ask yourself, do you feel comfortable sharing your opinion, even if it's not like other people' opinion or people above you? Do you feel comfortable pointing out to mistakes or things that can be improved?
Yeah.
Do you feel anxious making a mistake?
That's a
So all
great
those
example.
questions can help you figure out, is this environment really psychological safe for me?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's cool is like, and so that's 100% right. Another thing I would add is like, it's not like this is carved in stone. Everything can be changed. And a lot of it's really just education. So it's sometimes, we think of culture as just like this thing in the atmosphere that's uncontrollable, that's just magic. But a lot of it actually can be changed. And so I think that if someone feels like they're in an environment where they feel, I love that example, that question, do you feel anxious? Like that is a great question, because even if you're going to I don't know, you're just doing something, going down the street and you feel anxious about something, like, yeah, psychological safety is not feeling anxious. It's feeling like confident and secure that you're trying to solve for a better purpose as opposed to, I don't even know what, but I think that's a great example. And so I just think that it's not the end all. Like it's not the end gaming. I guess what I'm trying to say. I'm a little sick, so
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
I'm not super articulate, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's always possible to change, and individuals can change within an organization because you could bring as an individual and say, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to bring my values into this, and I'm going to push harder to make people understand why this is so important. And it might require a little bit of like patience with other people in that environment because they're probably, like you said, they're probably very short with others and they're not necessarily thinking about like long term and processes.
Yeah, and definitely a message I want to give here, especially for people who are leading others. Your role is even more important because I think that how the leader operates really have a very big impact about how the organization behaves.
Yes.
So leaders even have more responsibility towards thinking about those things, how they react, because a lot of times people do it just kind of without thinking.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I have this colleague, actually, a guy I work with, he had this great comment about it. And he was like, it's okay to make mistakes, but then you have to bring up why we made the mistake so we don't make it again. It's not
Exactly.
like it's okay to make mistake after mistake after mistake. It's okay, you found a process failing. Let's make the process better so it doesn't happen again. And I think that's the kind of model we all want to.
Definitely. And I want us to transition towards, now that we talked about what it is and how to identify it, to talk about why is it even important, right? Other than not feeling anxious, obviously. And you mentioned to me that I think the work you're doing and also like research, a Google research, you mentioned about the Google research about how psychological safety can impact employee turnover.
Yes.
So
Yes. So
can you
there are
share a
two
little bit
things.
about it?
Yeah, exactly. There are two things that I think are really important. One is that low psychological safety environments have high employee turnover. And it's not just like everyone says, "Oh, high turnover, that's too bad." There's a cost to high turnover, right? And it really depends on, obviously each organization is different, but if you can have average turnover and you reduce it to half the average of the industry, you're saving likely millions of dollars a year in recruiting costs and training costs, onboarding costs. I mean, there's so much, right? And so that's a big deal. So turnover is a big deal. And then also the Google study was saying that the best teams at Google, they didn't define what best teams are. It always drives me crazy. But I think
Mm-hmm.
what they meant was the teams that have developed products that are highly profitable. That's my assumption. It's a business, right?
Yeah, of
It's
course.
publicly traded. So like that, well, I'll just assume that. And so they said the only thing they could find that united its best teams, one single through line, was high psychological safety within the group. And I thought that was so cool because I think we've led our whole lives thinking, oh, well, maybe it's education, maybe it's, I don't know, gender, maybe, who knows, right? Like it's diversity. And I think it really just pinpoints that there's a huge benefit to companies and organizations when you can create a culture where people feel good. And actually, what's cool about that, by the way, is it's by team. It's not the whole organization, right? So it's that different teams can be super productive within a maybe potentially toxic environment. I'm sure Google's
Exactly.
not toxic, but like who knows what the general vibe is, but within groups or leaders, like you said, who are able to create this great sense of like security and accountability in a way that's really productive.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned to you earlier that I think the leaders even have more responsibilities
Yeah.
because if a leader behaves in a way that is very blaming and very, low tolerance to errors, that very easily trickles down
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
brings a lot of defensiveness, even if it's really not something that people think about it, but they do it unconsciously because they are afraid that they will be penalized if they're going to make mistakes. So the leader's, role is very, very important here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like also when we're talking about this, I always think about like researchers and thinking about it kind of as everything as a little bit as an experiment and like take out the ego and just say, okay, well, like here's what we're working on. How can we make it better? Or like what are ways that we should be thinking about, things we should be thinking about that we're missing? And the other thing I always think about with psychological safety is groupthink. And there was this really funny business school case study about this time in America where there was new Coke. And Coca-Cola was like, oh, we have all this secret research that shows people secretly prefer the taste of Pepsi to Coke, even though whatever their branding is better. And so people buy more Coke. And they're like, so let's make new Coke that tastes like Pepsi. And that'll be great because then we'll just take the whole market. We won't be 1 and 2. It'll be like, 1 and 20. Pepsi will
Yeah.
just be obliterated and we'll take all the market share. And the thing is, everyone on that group who did that was the same, Myers-Briggs, sort of, what do you call it? 4 initials. And the idea is that they didn't have anyone on there who was like a feeler. And like, that's more like me. Like and like the feeler would have said, are you crazy? I want to buy a Coke and have it taste like a Coke and then know what I'm going to get. And it's not about like, it's sort of independent of everything, what it tastes like. But like for me, the whole experience is like the red can and the taste and so they ended up spending all this money marketing new Coke and doing this whole thing. And it was a huge failure. And it would cost them a ton of money. And like, it's that kind of thing when everyone's thinking the same way, or maybe very hierarchical. We don't really
Yeah.
know, right? But basically, they weren't inviting other opinions as an experiment to say, okay, well, we're going to do this. Like, what are some things we should be thinking about that could be a problem for this plan?
No,
So it's
that's a
actually,
great story.
yeah, it's really crazy.
And that kind of leads me to how women play a role here because I
Yeah.
think, I'm generalizing, obviously. I mean, but you mentioned ego, right? You mentioned not challenging other opinions. And I think women are very well suited to creating psychologically safe environment because we come with less ego. We're more open to hear other opinions. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. I agree.
You agree with me?
I do think that women are a little bit more like kind of results driven in like at least for me, I always think, even when my daughter, so I have a 13-year-old, but when she was a baby, there are always these choices you had where you could like solve the problem right now, or you could like be more miserable, but solve it as like a long-term solution, kind of like, helping the kids sleep through the night, or I don't know, like tantrums and all these different things. Right. And so I feel like I might have been before, but now I'm even more focused on like, what's just the long-term solution? Because I just don't want to like be dealing with this problem every day. I'd rather like have like a plan and a strategy to kind of get rid of it. And I do agree with that. I think, it's funny though. I think the ego thing really comes down to fear.
Yeah, a lot
And
of time, yeah.
I think women, I don't know why, but the fear that women have is a little bit different than the fear that men have, right? I mean, I just don't think that women are, or at least I'm just really not that worried about looking dumb. Like that's just like not a concern I have. So I'd rather just do what I think is the best for the best plan and find it and be the experimenter and be the researcher. But the other thing I would say is, I mean, also, I don't know if Israel's the same, but in the States, there's just so many more men running things
Yeah,
that and you also have this whole baby boomer dynamic, I think, of like this kind of a little bit toxic, aggressive leader who kind of knows everything and needs to be like the super decisive person. It's like this sort of stereotype. But I think that people go back on that when they are fearful and in leadership positions, as opposed to, eliciting advice or input from other people and coming up with the best solution. Because I think people feel like it reduces their authority. I don't know if women do that as much. I mean, I'm much more like relational as a person. Like I always like want to chat with people and hear what they have to say because I find it really interesting. And I also feel like I don't know everything. Like I would rather have someone tell me what they think and then I can decide for myself. But it's better than always going it alone. The going it alone is when you get into trouble.
exactly. And it's that, and also creating teams that are diverse. Diverse, not just in gender relation, but when I was managing teams, I try always to think about, okay, I want to have a mix of experience, right? Not having everyone either very, very experienced or very junior. A mix of background, right? Not everyone white man or coming from the same school or whatever, because that creates people thinking alike, and gender also, and race, like a combination of people from different backgrounds who think differently. And then we can have interesting discussions, right? Because people think differently, and also respecting that someone that is coming with maybe very limited experience, but sometimes have a very important perspective.
Yes. And I would say as an entrepreneur, one of the things I have found is I am not a good arbiter of what the average person thinks. Like it happens all the time. Like I'm really not good at all at social media, for instance, all sorts of areas where I really can't understand what the average person is going to think. And so what's interesting is, especially if you're a group of highly educated people and you're designing a product for like the average American or the average internet user, that is not the same as what your group is, right? That's a different person. And I think that you need to be really sort of flexible and curious about what's important to that person. And that's why I agree with you. Like the more that you have diverse backgrounds, people who've lived different places, because what happens is, things that seem obvious to me don't seem obvious to somebody else. And I think you have to bring up those unconscious assumptions because that's when you get into trouble.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tell us, Francie, tell us a little bit about your work and how you got to what you do today.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's such a random. So, I mean, where I am is it's like very different from where I started, but there's always the same like thread of how it all started. And initially, this whole thing got started actually during a presidential debate with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016. And there was a whole like debate about who had done more for the 10 million manufacturing workers who lost their jobs. And I thought, well, hold on a minute. I was like, that's a lot of people. Are we really saying like 10 million people have just lost their manufacturing job in a while? And like, does that account for xenophobia? And then I also thought, well, who's helping those people get another job? What happens? Like, when you lose a job. And I kind of thought there would be like a Yahoo of career change, like some like inexpensive, free thing that helps people maybe do it. Because usually when I had these ideas about like, does this business exist, there would be like a billion, like I had this other idea of like hidden meat products and vegetarian food and foods, like candy or whatever would have like pig hooves and all sorts of things. And so that, there are like a billion of those websites. And so usually when I had this thought of like, oh, there must be someone, like, does this exist, it would be like endless. And so I was shocked that there wasn't much support for people switching jobs, like in a very sort of easy way to find. And the reason I thought that was interesting is because I have actually switched careers a number of times. And when I tell my family about it, it completely freaks them out. And they're like, what are you doing? How's that going to work? And I'm like, chill, like, it'll be fine. Like, I'll figure it out, like, God, relax, And for me, I always had so much confidence and optimism that it would always work out. And what I realize is like, again, like I'm not representative of the average person. Most people, that kind of change is very scary. And so what I was thinking is like, well, knowing that most people like freak out with like career change, like that must be really hard for these people because they probably don't have family members that are great at advising them about it either. I mean, I didn't. And so that's how it all started. Initially it was going to be kind of like, I always joke, it was like a kumbaya, like free thing where like we all like, anyone in a career transition would kind of help each other and it would be kind of like a community. And then what I learned is like, I mean, I do not know anything about social media. I don't really have like a platform as a psychologist or a community builder. And so it evolved, it kept evolving. And now it's really more like it's like a B2B marketplace. But the idea is though, we do group coaching with expert coaches and they bring their expertise to different groups. So it could be groups of colleagues or any kind of group. And the idea is it's just more affordable on a per person basis. And also you get incredible expertise and as opposed to the opposite, which is there are a lot of these coaching companies where they pay the coach the absolute minimum they'd be willing to accept. And it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
And so, and usually what that attracts is like the very brand new coaches. They aren't experts. They're just kind of learning. And there's for sure a market for that. But what I kept thinking about is like, we have these incredible coaches, like it works well because they're looking for leads. Because typically these executive coaches, it's like something like 80% of their business comes from word of mouth. And then the other question then what starts to happen is, well, if you need a coach, you may not be in that network. What if you're outside of a city center and you don't know anyone? Or what if you don't even know that you could use a coach? That's just the idea of it doesn't even come to you. So it was really just more, I'm trying to like thread a needle. And so in the end, it's like we have three stakeholders and one is executive coaches, one is employers and one is employees. And the idea is like bringing expertise to the middle of the workforce.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I really love it. And, it's just, I'm really just, it's fun because I love being like a matchmaker. That's like one of like the best uses of my brain. And so it works really well because I can talk about why these coaches are so great. And then I can talk to the coaches about the problems that these organizations have. And it ends up being, it's like a really nice service. And I think also what's so fun is that it's completely customizable. And so it kind of freaks people out initially because they're like, oh my God, there are too many variables. I'm overwhelmed. But then once we kind of get through the process, they realize like, oh, this is wonderful because I can have exactly what I want. I'm not selling like one product. I'm just kind of matchmaking and finding the right fit.
Fantastic. Yeah. And you mentioned something I wanted just to touch on. I mean, the change thing, because kudos to you for changing, right? I mean, and I've changed my career and I know it's very, very difficult and very scary. And I know that a lot of people are very, very afraid of change, even if it happens within like the same job, right? Because change is the only constant. Like things change all the time. And also in organizations, there are a lot of changes, a lot of reorgs, a lot of stuff. And people really dread that.
Yeah.
And I guess my message is that to anyone listening to us, don't look at change as necessarily a negative thing, because a lot of times it actually brings a lot of positivity, a lot of new things. exciting thing. So try to look at it as, okay, it's a change, and let's try to see what it brings. And it may bring actually good things.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is, and actually, if you think about it from like an organizational perspective, when someone's foisting change upon you, it's not fun, right? They're just telling you the way you're good at this, you understand how this works. Guess what? Now we're going to change it. But there's like a reason, right? Typically the reason is it'll be more effective, more efficient. It's more in line with current technology. We can utilize something. And so I think you always have to look for like the positive why, because that can be like a motivator for the change. And actually this is coming up. I connected with a woman whose business is basically automation and AI implementation for very like binary tasks at organizations. So for instance, like if you have a person who's doing billing, right? And all they're doing is getting the bills out, making sure they're getting paid, that kind of thing. That can be done by a computer or by a robot. And so what they do is they come in and they sort of interview people about their job to make sure they're doing it all. The people that are interviewing are terrified because they think it's a way to put them, like they're giving all the secrets of how they do it so that they can lose their job. And so what this woman wants to talk to me about is she's like, but it's so great because now is the time, you have more time. You can do professional development. You can think more about innovation or like another purpose for this human that's not this very rote thing. You bring more humanity to the job because you're really you're letting go of these very binary tasks. And I think that like that's the other thing with change too, right? Is you have to see like the positive side, not just the loss, but like what you could gain. And like that requires, I guess, a fair amount of imagination.
Oh, and sometimes it's just trusting that, you will find whatever will
Yeah, I
make
love
sense
that.
for you, even if, sometimes for the short term, sometimes, yeah, you may lose your job, or you may, not be needed because, a machine can do your work. But in the long run, eventually, you'll figure out how to evolve. I think my message is that we all have to evolve all the time. We
Yeah.
cannot stay stagnated in an era that is moving so quickly.
Yes, exactly. No, I love it. But I think what you're saying is actually, to me, I think like the nugget is the trust and trusting that some good things will come out of this. It's almost also, I used to always say like when I was dating, I felt like always the next boyfriend would be better. If the good boyfriend's not working, there's no point holding on to him because there'll be a better one next. And it's like that same thing. Like, you have to see that like this isn't the right fit for you because like you said, things are changing. Like this is life. And so what's the better fit for you? What can you do? And I think to like, then again, you can be that researcher or the scientist who's trying to like experiment and be creative.
Exactly. Like the boyfriend analogy. Anyway, it's been a pleasure, Francie. And before we end our call today, tell us where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. So, the website is terawatt.co, just CO, no M.
Mm-hmm.
And we're pretty active on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Good spot. And I'd say those are the main ones.
Okay.
I try to present maybe like once a year at a conference or something to kind of get the word out. But I love being on panels or chatting. So you always find me on a podcast or some sort of chatting thing.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll definitely put your website and LinkedIn on the show notes. Thank you so much, Francie. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the episode with Francie, and that will help you realize how to build psychological safety and also if you're in the right environment. And before you go, I'm super excited to share my guest next week, which I absolutely admire. And if you haven't heard her name is Telly Whitney, and she's a co-founder of the Grace Hopper Celebration and author of Rebooting Tech Culture, a wonderful book that I highly recommend you to read. And we talked about the biggest myth in tech leadership and how it's holding women back. And we talk about the so-called tech genius stereotype that still hold many women back, how quiet leaders can thrive in loud rooms, and what actually builds confidence when you don't fit the mold. And for all of the women out there, if you feel capable but still invisible, this episode is for you. So Don't forget to subscribe to From a Woman to a Leader and share it with any woman who needs to hear it. And tune in for next week's episode with Telly. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.